Look around you. Something feels wrong, doesn't it? In 2025, the data confirms it. According to the World Health Organization, rates of depression and anxiety have doubled compared to pre-2020 levels. The CDC reports suicide among people aged 15 to 29 has become the second leading cause of death globally. And loneliness. Yes, loneliness has been declared a public health epidemic in the United States, with studies showing it carries the same mortality risk as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Think about that. Isolation is literally killing us. We live in a time of abundance, yet despair is everywhere. Never before have so many humans had instant access to comfort, entertainment, and connection, and yet never before have so many reported feeling empty, anxious, or broken. Why? Because the modern world is sick. Not just stressed, not just flawed, sick at its very core. Freud warned us about this in Civilization and Its Discontents, that society's very structures repress our instincts and make us neurotic. Nietzsche foresaw the death of God, a collapse of shared meaning that would leave us stranded in nihilism. Today, those predictions aren't just philosophy, they're lived reality. The numbers don't lie. Antidepressant prescriptions are at record highs, youth self-harm is rising, and brain scans of heavy social media users show the same dopamine dysregulation patterns as drug addicts. And here's the most disturbing part. This isn't an accident. The sickness is by design. Our technologies are engineered to exploit our attention, our markets are built to keep us endlessly consuming, and our institutions often reward conformity over truth. The result? A human mind under siege, a soul starved of meaning. A society where millions walk around with quiet desperation, masked by scrolling, shopping, or self-medication. Ask yourself, how did we end up in a world where a teenager with thousands of followers feels invisible? Where people sleep next to glowing rectangles but feel lonelier than ever? Where progress in medicine and wealth hasn't translated into progress in the human spirit? The truth is uncomfortable, but we have to face it. This isn't just individual weakness, it's systemic pathology. A world that offers stimulation but not satisfaction, abundance but not purpose. The diagnosis is clear. Our civilization is mentally unwell, and if we don't confront it directly, no pill, no gadget, no political promise will save us. The question is, what is driving this epidemic? What are the invisible forces shaping a generation into silence, despair, and fracture? To answer that, we have to open the door to psychology itself and look the sickness in the eye. Behind the headlines and statistics lies a storm brewing in the human psyche. Psychologists call it the silent epidemic. Anxiety disorders are now the most common mental illness in the world, affecting over 300 million people. Depression, according to the Global Burden of Disease Study, has become the leading cause of disability worldwide. And among Gen Z, more than half report experiencing regular symptoms of anxiety or depression. Half of an entire generation living under constant psychological strain. Freud might say this is civilization devouring its own children, repressing instincts until they erupt as neurosis. Jung would call it a collective shadow, all the fears, insecurities, and contradictions of our modern systems projected inward, turning individuals against themselves. We've built a world that promises freedom yet leaves us paralyzed by choice, that celebrates individuality yet suffocates us with conformity. And so the psyche cracks. What's happening neurologically is even more alarming. MRI studies reveal that chronic social media use literally reshapes the brain's reward circuits, producing dopamine spikes followed by brutal crashes, echoes of substance withdrawal. Psychologists have coined a new term for this: algorithmic despair. It's not just that the apps are addictive, it's that they manufacture cycles of false hope and emptiness, training the brain to seek novelty at the expense of depth. Add to that echo chamber atrophy, where constant exposure to filtered, like-minded content shrinks our tolerance for complexity. Our minds atrophy in cages of affirmation. Instead of grappling with reality, we consume a reflection of our own biases until the world feels hostile, incomprehensible, or absurd. Nietzsche once warned that if you gaze too long into the abyss gazes back. Today, that abyss is your feed, your curated algorithm, your endless scroll. And this isn't just individual suffering. It bleeds into relationships, politics, and community life. A 2024 Pew survey found that 70% of young adults say they feel misunderstood most of the time, even among friends. Loneliness has become not just an experience, but an identity. This fracture between inner life and outer world fuels what Camus called the absurd. The realization that existence feels stripped of meaning, yet demands we live on. But here's the terrifying paradox. Even as people feel broken, the systems profiting off their despair flourish. Pharmaceutical markets expand, mental health apps monetize insecurity, and platforms continue optimizing for engagement rather than well-being. The sickness isn't just untreated, it's exploited. So the question becomes, if the epidemic is psychological at its root, what philosophies, what structures of meaning are missing in the modern psyche? To answer that, we have to go deeper, not into medicine, but into philosophy, because it is in philosophy where the void has widened into crisis. The modern mind suffers not only from overstimulation, but from starvation of meaning. Nietzsche foresaw this crisis more than a century ago when he declared, "God is dead, and we have killed him." What he meant was not that some deity literally perished, but that the shared frameworks of faith, morality, and collective purpose that once grounded civilizations had collapsed under modernity. What replaced them? And into that vacuum rushed consumerism, politics, and algorithms, shallow substitutes for the depth of existential grounding. Camus described this condition as the absurd, the confrontation between humanity's longing for order and the universe's indifference. The absurd is not merely philosophical abstraction, it's the creeping sense millions now report that their lives feel weightless, interchangeable, and pointless. In 2025, Gallup surveys reveal that over 60% of people worldwide feel disengaged from their work. Most do not find meaning in their daily labor, but endure it as a necessity. The result? A global culture of quiet despair disguised as productivity. Schopenhauer might argue that this is the tyranny of the will, endless striving, endless craving, and inevitable disappointment. The will wants more, always more, and when society dangles infinite desires before us, we become trapped in cycles of yearning and dissatisfaction. Foucault added another layer, that modern institutions, schools, corporations, even healthcare, don't merely serve us, they discipline us. They mold our identities, surveil our behaviors, and enforce norms that dictate what counts as success, beauty, or sanity. Our sickness, then, is not accidental, it is cultivated. The void left by collapsed traditions has been filled with idols, status, wealth, identity, performance. But idols crumble. One study published in Nature Human Behavior in 2024 showed that people who prioritize extrinsic goals, status, fame, possessions, report higher rates of anxiety and depression, regardless of income. In other words, chasing the idols of modern life does not heal the void, it widens it. What emerges is a civilization with advanced technology but arrested meaning. Jung would argue that without myth, without symbols that point beyond the material, the psyche falls into disarray. We see this today in the rise of cult-like internet communities, conspiracy movements, or extremist ideologies. These are not anomalies, they are desperate attempts to patch the hole of meaning with anything, no matter how destructive. So here lies the core of the sickness, a philosophical anemia. We have medicine without wisdom, pleasure without purpose, progress without direction. And until we confront that void directly, no therapy, no gadget, no reform will fully heal us. But there is one force that thrives in the vacuum of meaning more ruthlessly than any other, technology itself, colonizing not only our time, but our very minds. That is where the sickness metastasizes. Technology promised liberation, but in practice, it has become a new architecture of control. Every swipe, every click, every scroll is tracked, fed into algorithms that learn how to exploit your vulnerabilities more effectively than any dictator or priest ever could. The result is not just distraction, it's colonization of the psyche. Brain imaging studies confirm what most of us already sense. Constant digital stimulation rewires attention networks in the prefrontal cortex, making sustained focus increasingly rare. A 2023 Stanford study showed that heavy multitaskers scored significantly lower on memory and concentration tests, their brains adapting not for depth, but for perpetual novelty. This isn't evolution, it's devolution by design. Freud warned that unchecked desire becomes neurosis. In our time, those desires aren't just unchecked, they're engineered. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, they don't simply mirror your interests, they manufacture them, nudging your subconscious toward compulsions. This is what I call algorithmic despair. The moment you realize you're not in charge of your desires anymore, that the machine is scripting your emotional life, drip-feeding dopamine like a lab rat's lever. Foucault's notion of surveillance applies here with brutal precision. Power no longer needs to punish openly. It operates through visibility, through the awareness that you are always being watched, measured, ranked. Your digital profile has become a dossier of your fears and cravings, used not to liberate, but to manipulate. We are, in effect, prisoners in a panopticon of screens, willingly carrying our own surveillance towers in our pockets. And yet it goes deeper. Technology doesn't only monitor behavior, it shapes identity. Studies show adolescents now define themselves more through online validation than through real-world experience. The self becomes a performance metric. Likes, shares, followers. Jung might say we've traded the true self for a hollow persona, a mask crafted for algorithms rather than for the soul. But here's the sinister paradox. While technology fractures attention, it also monopolizes it. Never before in history has a handful of corporations had such intimate power over billions of human nervous systems. They don't just sell ads, they harvest reality itself, turning every human gesture into monetizable data. The world outside the screen fades, while the curated glow becomes the primary reality. Baudrillard warned of this in Simulacra and Simulation. The copy replaces the real, the simulation consumes the world. The sickness here is not that technology exists, but that it colonizes the most sacred terrain, our inner lives. And while we might think we're choosing, the truth is, the choosing has already been done for us. The question is, if our desires are programmed, if our attention is captured, what happens to freedom, to agency, to humanity itself? And yet technology is only one claw in the machine. The other is older, subtler, but just as corrosive. Consumerism, the dopamine trap that keeps the modern soul restless, exhausted, and perpetually unfulfilled. If technology captures our attention, consumerism captures our desires. The two are twin engines of the same sickness. Modern consumer culture thrives on what Schopenhauer called the tyranny of the will, an endless chain of cravings that can never be satisfied. Buy the new phone, the new shoes, the new supplement, and maybe, just maybe, you'll feel whole. But wholeness never comes. The purchase fades, the novelty dies, and the hunger returns stronger than before. Neuroscience has mapped this cycle in brutal clarity. The brain's reward system, centered in the nucleus accumbens, surges with dopamine not when we possess, but when we anticipate. The moment of having is a letdown. This is why marketing doesn't just sell products, it sells desire itself, keeping us hooked on anticipation like addicts chasing their next fix. A 2024 MIT study confirmed what many suspected. Frequent online shoppers show neural patterns almost identical to those of substance abusers, complete with tolerance, craving, and post-reward crash. Consumerism is not neutral, it is engineered. Advertising psychology has advanced into behavioral manipulation so precise it exploits insecurities we didn't know we had. Foucault would call this disciplinary desire, a system that molds not just what we buy, but who we think we are. You are what you consume. Your identity is curated through brands, trends, and possessions. The void Nietzsche warned of, emptiness after the death of higher meaning, is filled with logos and slogans, a pantheon of false gods. But here's the cruelty. Consumerism weaponizes dopamine against us. The pursuit of endless novelty weakens our capacity for contentment. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, the treadmill effect where each reward quickly becomes the new baseline, forcing us to run faster for smaller hits of satisfaction. And in 2025, the treadmill is global. Fast fashion, fast food, fast tech. The planet burns, resources vanish, yet the hunger accelerates. The sickness is not just personal, it is planetary. And what does this do to the psyche? It hollows it out. Instead of cultivating meaning, resilience, or wisdom, we cultivate cravings. Jung might say this is archetypal inversion, where the hero's journey to selfhood is replaced with the consumer's journey through shopping carts. Camus would call it absurd, a life chasing objects to fend off existential emptiness, knowing all along that the void cannot be filled by things. Consumerism's trap is this. It convinces you that the ache inside is because you don't have enough, when in fact the ache is because you are not enough, as you are. And as we drown in products, we starve for purpose. But there's an even more haunting irony. The very culture that floods us with products also claims to connect us. Billions online, constant notifications, endless friends. Yet research shows we've never felt more alone. This is the paradox of hyperconnection, and it is tearing the modern soul apart. We are more connected than any generation in human history, and yet we are more alone. That is the paradox of hyperconnection. Billions of us wake up each morning to glowing notifications, group chats, digital feeds brimming with activity. On paper, this should be the golden age of community, but the data tells a darker story. In 2023, the US Surgeon General declared loneliness an epidemic, reporting that nearly 1 in 2 adults feels isolated on a regular basis. A 2024 meta-analysis across 113 countries found social isolation correlated with a 30% increase in mortality risk. Why does a world stitched together by fiber optic cables feel so fragmented? Because these connections are thin, fragile, performative. They give the appearance of intimacy while eroding its reality. Sociologists call it parasocial saturation, relationships reduced to curated avatars and surface interactions. We know hundreds of faces on a screen, but few of those people would show up at our door when tragedy strikes. Jung would call this an inflation of the persona. The mask we wear online consumes the self behind it. Alienation is not new. Marx wrote about the worker estranged from his labor, Durkheim about anomie, the breakdown of shared norms. But in 2025, alienation has metastasized. It's not just from work or tradition. It's alienation from each other, and even from ourselves. Neuroscience shows that when people spend more time online than in person, their brain's social circuits, the anterior cingulate cortex, the mirror neuron system, dull in responsiveness. Put simply, we are losing the neural hardware of empathy. And yet the irony is brutal. The same apps that intensify loneliness exploit that very loneliness. They sell connection as a product, dating apps, social feeds, even AI companions, while deepening the wound they claim to heal. This is not random, it's structural. Loneliness keeps us online longer, searching for belonging in places that monetize our search. The more alienated we feel, the more valuable we become as users. Nietzsche warned that in the absence of higher meaning, people would herd together, mistaking conformity for community. We see this in digital tribalism, online mobs, identity echo chambers, political polarization. Communities reduced not to shared humanity, but shared enemies. Camus might argue this is our attempt to rebel against the absurd, grasping at groups, even toxic ones, just to feel less alone in the void. But let's be brutally honest. Hyperconnection is not connection. It is noise. It is the illusion of being seen while remaining invisible. And this illusion breeds despair, because it tricks us into thinking we shouldn't feel lonely, when in fact we are starved for the very thing our nervous systems evolved for: authentic, embodied presence. So if technology colonizes our attention and consumerism hijacks our desire, hyperconnection corrodes our belonging. But what if there are deeper, more controversial forces at play? Forces we don't like to talk about, because to name them means questioning the very foundations of modern life. When we strip away the polite explanations, we find forces driving the sickness of modern life that are rarely discussed openly, because to expose them is to question the legitimacy of our institutions, our leaders, even our values. These are not surface-level glitches. They are structural viruses embedded in the very fabric of our civilization. Let's start with equality. A sacred value, yes, but also a double-edged sword. Tocqueville warned that democracies obsessed with equality risk breeding conformity, envy, and mediocrity. In 2025, we see it play out as equality's hidden tyranny. When everyone must be equal, genuine excellence is attacked as elitist, while genuine suffering is dismissed because others have it worse. The result? A culture where individuality is both demanded and punished, creating psychological whiplash. Then there's education. Once a path to wisdom, it has become, as Foucault argued, an apparatus of discipline. Schools teach compliance more than creativity, producing generations fluent in standardized tests but starved of critical thinking. A 2024 OECD report revealed record-high academic stress among teens, with 70% linking school directly to their mental health struggles. Education, the supposed cure, has become part of the sickness. And politics, let's not sanitize it. Politics today is not about governance, it's about outrage as currency. Algorithms amplify extremes because rage glues eyeballs to screens. We are marinated in conflict, trained to see opponents as enemies. Research in Nature Human Behavior 2023 found that online political polarization grows not from exposure to difference, but from isolation in minded groups. Echo chambers don't just distort, they radicalize. Even the very idea of progress can be toxic. The cult of constant growth, economic, technological, personal, ignores the psychological reality that the human mind is not built for endless acceleration. Schopenhauer would argue that the will to more, to faster, to bigger is a recipe for perpetual dissatisfaction. We treat slowness, stillness, even contentment as failures in a system addicted to speed, and lurking beneath it all is the commercialization of identity. Who you are, your gender, race, politics, even your trauma, has become monetizable content. Corporations and influencers alike brand suffering and turn authenticity into performance. Nietzsche would call this slave morality reborn, resentment as identity, commodified and sold back to us. These are uncomfortable truths. The modern sickness is not just the fault of greedy corporations or manipulative technologies, it is baked into our deepest cultural scripts. Scripts that tell us to worship equality but fear difference, to seek progress but never pause, to belong but never transcend. So where do we go from here? If the roots are this tangled, what can possibly heal us? The answer lies not in denial or utopian fantasy, but in science. Hard evidence showing how minds can be rebuilt, attention restored, and despair transformed. The storm is real, but so are the tools of recovery. If the sickness of the modern world is real, then we must ask, what does the evidence say about healing? The good news is that while despair is spreading, so is knowledge. Neuroscience, psychology, and psychiatry have never offered clearer maps of the human mind, or more practical tools to mend it. Let's start with the basics. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, remains one of the most rigorously validated methods for treating depression and anxiety. A 2024 Cochrane review confirmed its effectiveness across cultures and age groups, with brain imaging showing it strengthens prefrontal circuits responsible for emotional regulation. Put simply, CBT trains the mind to recognize and rewrite the scripts that keep us trapped in despair. It's not magic, it's rewiring. Mindfulness, once dismissed as spiritual fluff, is now hard science. Researchers at Harvard have shown that 8 weeks of mindfulness practice can increase gray matter density in the hippocampus, the brain's hub for learning and memory, while reducing activity in the amygdala, the fear center. In 2025, mindfulness is no longer just meditation. It includes VR-guided breathing labs, AI-powered apps that track emotional drift, and even corporate resilience programs. The data is clear. Cultivating awareness reduces anxiety, improves focus, and restores the nervous system's balance. Then there's neuroscience's bold frontier, psychedelic-assisted therapy. The FDA in 2024 approved MDMA for PTSD, and psilocybin trials for treatment-resistant depression show remission rates unthinkable a decade ago. In 2025, AI-guided psychedelic sessions are emerging, pairing machine learning with human therapy to tailor music, dosage, and pacing to the individual's psyche. Critics call it risky, pioneers call it revolutionary. But either way, it's reshaping psychiatry at its core. Community resilience therapy is another breakthrough. Studies following the COVID and war-era loneliness epidemics revealed that isolation kills, but structured community programs, shared meals, group storytelling, neighborhood resilience circles cut depressive symptoms by up to 40%. The science is blunt. Humans heal in groups. We are wired for belonging, and when belonging is restored, so is hope. Even physical health plays a role. Exercise, especially resistance training, is now as effective as antidepressants for many mild to moderate cases of depression, according to a 2023 Umbrella review of meta-analyses. Sleep hygiene, nutrition, exposure to natural light, all are scientifically validated pillars of resilience. The body and mind are not separate battlegrounds, they are one ecosystem. But here's the key. None of these methods are passive. Healing requires active participation, courage, and often discomfort. The modern world sells comfort as medicine, but true recovery is the opposite. It's the willingness to face pain, to retrain the brain, to rebuild the self. And yet, science alone cannot carry the weight of meaning. Therapy may stabilize, but it cannot tell us why to live. For that we need philosophy, not as abstract theory, but as daily armor against despair. Science can repair the circuits of the brain, but philosophy gives us the courage to keep living. Without it, healing is mechanical, incomplete. Philosophy is the antidote to meaninglessness, and the ancients and moderns alike left us blueprints for survival. The Stoics, for example, offer tools that feel designed for 2025. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. Neuroscience now echoes this. Reappraisal, the act of reframing a negative thought, activates the same prefrontal pathways strengthened by CBT. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, reminded himself daily that life is brief, that anger is pointless, and that control extends only to one's own mind. Imagine what that mindset could do in a world drowning in outrage and distraction. Nietzsche, often misread as a prophet of despair, instead called us to amor fati, the love of fate. To not merely endure life's burdens, but embrace them as necessary for greatness. In the face of depression's whisper that nothing matters, Nietzsche dares us to create meaning where none is given. This is resilience, not as comfort but as defiance, to turn suffering itself into fuel. Camus sharpened this with his idea of revolt. Life is absurd, he admitted, yet the human response is not surrender but rebellion. To live fully, even joyfully, in the face of absurdity is to triumph. His image of Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder endlessly uphill, is not tragedy but liberation. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. What if our daily grind, our seemingly futile battles, could be reimagined as acts of freedom? Jung adds another dimension: integration. He argued that wholeness is not the absence of darkness, but the embrace of it. Our shadow, the impulses, fears, and contradictions we repress, must be faced if we are to heal. In 2025, this resonates deeply. So much of our sickness comes from curated personas, denial of complexity, fear of imperfection. Jung reminds us that true strength is found in integrating the chaos, not hiding from it. Even Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, offers a strange kind of solace. He saw life as suffering driven by insatiable will, but he also pointed to art, music, and contemplation as escapes from the tyranny of desire. In moments of beauty, we glimpse relief from the restless will. Studies today confirm that art therapy, music, and awe experiences can reduce stress hormones and elevate mood. His bleakness, reframed, becomes guidance. Seek transcendence, not just consumption. These philosophies are not abstract luxuries. They are survival kits. They remind us that resilience is not only medical, but metaphysical. Healing requires a worldview that can withstand tragedy, alienation, and absurdity. But here's the challenge. Philosophy and science mean nothing if left on the page. They demand embodiment. They demand that we stop waiting for the world to fix itself and instead take radical responsibility for reclaiming our souls. And that begins with a call. A call not polite or gentle, but fierce and uncompromising. The diagnosis is brutal. The modern world is sick. The prognosis is clear. Left untreated, the sickness deepens. But the prescription, the path to recovery, is not just medicine, not just mindfulness, not just philosophy. It is reclamation, a radical reclaiming of your soul from systems designed to fragment it. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you made a choice that wasn't nudged by an algorithm, shaped by advertising, or performed for an audience? If the answer feels uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the beginning of awakening. The truth is that most of us are not living. We are being lived. We are carrying out scripts handed to us by corporations, governments, even cultural ideals we never chose. Recovery begins when you tear up those scripts. You cannot heal in the same system that profits from your sickness. That's why the most subversive act today is not outrage, not protest, not another hashtag. It's to reclaim presence, depth, and authenticity. To log off when the world demands you scroll. To choose silence when noise is monetized. To find meaning not in endless novelty, but in enduring values: love, courage, wisdom, service. Science shows us that our brains can be rewired, that despair is not destiny. Philosophy shows us that suffering can be transformed, that meaning can be forged even in absurdity. Together they demand action. Practice mindfulness not to calm an app's metric, but to remember you are more than your thoughts. Train your body not for aesthetics, but for resilience. Engage in community not for status, but for survival. Because loneliness kills and belonging heals. The call is not to withdraw from the world, but to confront it with a new posture. Unflinching, rebellious, alive. Nietzsche's amor fati, to embrace your fate fully. Camus's revolt, to live as if every breath were defiance. Jung's integration, to own the shadow rather than flee it. These are not theories, they are weapons. And here is the final truth. You are not powerless. Yes, the world is sick. Yes, the forces arrayed against wholeness are immense, but healing is contagious. One person reclaiming authenticity inspires another. Communities built on presence can outlast empires built on illusion. If despair spreads like a virus, then so can hope. So this is the call. Stop outsourcing your soul. Stop waiting for permission to be free. Reclaim your mind, your desires, your connections, your meaning. Because a healed world will not be handed to us. It will be built, one reclaimed soul at a time. The time is now. Not tomorrow, not when the system changes, not when the world is less cruel. Now. The modern world is sick, yes, but you, if you choose, are the cure.